We live in an age of appearances. Where smiles are currency, wellness is a product, and certainty is performed like theater. We've been taught that wholeness is something we can earn, if only we follow the script. Work hard. Stay positive. Look at the part. Blend in. Don't ask too many questions. Suppress the strange, the sad, the skeptical. Wear the right mask and you will be rewarded, and many do exactly that. They climb the ladder, curate their image, perfect their routine. From the outside, it looks like they've made it. They are successful, confident, whole, but something haunts them behind closed doors. It's not chaos, not failure. It's something far more unsettling, a quiet emptiness. A faint but persistent sense that something essential is missing. Something real. And here's the contradiction. The more we conform, the more we fracture. The more we perform wellness, the more ill we feel. The closer we appear to wholeness, the more distant we are from ourselves. Why? Because wholeness, as we've been sold it, is not truth. It is controlled. What we call normal is often nothing more than obedience dressed as health. A set of pre-approved emotions. A range of acceptable desires. A personality shaped not by inner discovery, but by societal demand. Erich Fromm called it the fear of freedom. That terrifying moment when we realize our thoughts, our wants, even ourselves might not be our own. And Carl Jung warned of the persona, the mask we wear to survive in society. Useful, yes, but dangerous when mistaken for the whole. You smile when you're grieving. You agree when you're skeptical. You succeed while feeling dead inside, but you're not broken. You're beginning to see that wholeness is not perfection. It's not constant happiness. It's not the absence of doubt or discomfort. It's integration. It's acknowledging every cracked, chaotic part of yourself and welcoming it in. But society doesn't want you integrated. It wants you to be compliant. It wants you smooth, digestible, easily labeled, and easily sold to. So it tells you that confusion is a weakness. That sadness is a flaw. That resistance is a disease. And we believe it. We medicate the discomfort. We filter the chaos. We push down every inconvenient truth until one day it pushes back. There's an ancient myth that mirrors this dilemma. Narcissus, who fell in love with his own reflection, not realizing it wasn't real, but Narcissus wasn't destroyed by love. He was destroyed by illusion. By worshiping the surface while ignoring the depth. Like him, many today drown in the shallow waters of their projected selves, not because they're flawed, but because they've been forbidden to be whole. The culture demands a mask, and we forget there was ever a face beneath it, but something eventually cracks. A moment of fatigue, a panic, a question that won't go away, and when it comes, it doesn't mean you're failing. It means something deeper is trying to break through. That fracture, that first split in the mirror, isn't the end. It's the beginning of a different kind of vision, one that doesn't avoid the shadows, one that doesn't fear discomfort, one that no longer needs to pretend. As the cracks widen, the performance becomes harder to sustain. And in the silence between your roles, you begin to hear something strange. Yourself. But this is just the first fracture, the beginning of doubt. And once the mask begins to fall, we're left to face a harder question. What happens when we no longer believe the story we're living? Sometimes it begins quietly, a strange heaviness behind the eyes, an unexplained restlessness. The vague sense that something inside is unraveling. At first, we call it stress, then maybe burnout, eventually anxiety, depression, a disorder. But what if it's none of those things? What if it's something else entirely? Not a flaw, but a signal? We've been taught that breakdowns are failures of the mind, malfunctions, weaknesses, things to be corrected. We treat them with pills, diagnoses, or silence, hoping to bury the disruption. But sometimes the breakdown is not a descent into madness. It's a revolt, a rebellion of the soul against a life that has become unlivable. Carl Jung believed that what we repress, our fears, rage, desires, instincts, doesn't disappear. It waits. It gathers in the unconscious, gaining weight and intensity until one day it erupts. This is the shadow, the disowned parts of ourselves that we were told to hide, the pain we were told to ignore, the questions we were told never to ask. When the shadow breaks through, it feels like it is collapsing. But in truth, it is an emergence. We are not falling apart. We are being rearranged. Across cultures and time, this transformation has been mythologized as a journey to the underworld, the descent of Inanna into the land of the dead, Orpheus chasing Eurydice through darkness, Christ vanished into the tomb before the resurrection. These stories are not about death. They are about rebirth through suffering. Each descent is not a punishment, but a passage. To ascend, something must first break. And what breaks is not the self, but the illusion. In modern terms, we see this as trauma, panic, disorientation. But underneath, there is often a deeper logic. As R.D. Laing once wrote, insanity is a perfectly rational adjustment to an insane world. What we call dysfunction may simply be the soul's refusal to adapt to a lie. Think of the soldier who returns from war and cannot stop screaming. The woman who smiles at her desk every day but can't feel anything anymore. The child who stops speaking after too many betrayals. Are these people broken? Or are they speaking in the only language left, silence, rupture, collapse? In a world that rewards numbness and punishes awareness, the act of feeling deeply, of cracking open, becomes revolutionary. But we've been conditioned to view inner pain as personal failure. If we suffer, it must mean we're weak. If we collapse, we must be defective. So we hide it. We fake composure. We apologize for the storm inside us. But here's the deeper truth. Pain is not the enemy. It is the teacher. It's the body's last attempt to speak after being ignored for too long. A panic attack can be a cry to escape a life that feels like a cage. Depression can be a refusal to participate in a world that no longer makes sense. Dissociation can be a form of psychic protest, a final boundary drawn between self and system. These responses aren't madness. They're messages. And the message is simple. Something is wrong, not just inside you, but around you. And if you listen closely, the breakdown becomes a compass. It points not to dysfunction, but to the disowned truth. This is the paradox. The very thing that frightens us, the crack, the fracture, the break, is also the doorway. The doorway out of illusion, out of compliance, out of the roles we were forced to play, and into something real. But to walk through that door is to enter the unknown, to leave behind the old masks, to face what we were never meant to see. And that's the next question we must ask. If the pain is a message, what is it trying to reveal? What truth have we been trained to fear? There's a question few ever ask. Who gets to decide what's sane? It seems obvious. A sane person is rational, stable, functional, someone who fits in, someone who behaves. But sane is not a fact. It's a filter. And that filter changes depending on who controls it. History doesn't remember this kindly. At different points in time, sanity has meant absolute obedience to the church, allegiance to the state, or agreement with whatever ideology reigned supreme. Dissent wasn't disagreement, it was insanity. Michel Foucault, in his Madness and Civilization, argued that madness is not a natural category, it's a political one. Society draws a boundary between reason and unreason, and that boundary is never neutral. It protects power. This is where the story turns darker, because many of us believe we live in an enlightened age. We think madness is no longer a tool of social control, but a medical reality, diagnosable, treatable, scientific. But look closer. Where do we draw the line between a disorder and a refusal to comply? When a student questions the system, they're disruptive. When an employee resists exploitation, they're difficult. When a person disconnects from a toxic society, they're depressed. When they speak out too loudly, too emotionally, too honestly, they're unstable. The mask of medical objectivity often hides the same ancient weapon. Silence the rebels by calling them broken. In 1973, a psychologist named David Rosenhan conducted an experiment that shattered psychiatry's illusion of certainty. He and several healthy individuals got themselves admitted into psychiatric hospitals by claiming to hear a single, vague hallucination, a voice saying empty, hollow, or thud. Once inside, they behaved completely normally. And yet, not one was identified as sane. In fact, the more they acted normal, the more their behavior was interpreted through a lens of illness. Writing notes? Paranoia. Being quiet? Depression? Polite disagreement? Delusional thinking. They were diagnosed, drugged, and kept institutionalized until they agreed that they were sick. The implication was chilling. Once labeled, sanity becomes irrelevant. What matters is submission to the label. The experiment wasn't just a critique of psychiatry. It was a mirror held up to power. It showed how easily we confuse conformity with health, and difference with danger. Now extend that logic. What happens when an entire culture begins to define normal in increasingly narrow terms? Where mental wellness is just the ability to function inside a broken system. Where sadness is a chemical problem, not a human response. Where rage is medicated instead of heard. Where burnout is treated with breathing exercises so you can go back to burning out. We live in a time where mental health is a billion-dollar industry. But beneath the glossy campaigns and self-care slogans lies a subtle message. You are the problem. Not the world, not the economy, not the emptiness of modern life, you. And so the system maintains itself, not through violence, but through diagnosis, not through prisons, but through prescriptions. We are taught to pathologize our pain, to see it as malfunction instead of meaning. But what if the pain isn't a failure, but evidence of your aliveness? What if your anxiety isn't a disorder, but a signal that something is deeply wrong with the environment you're in? A sane person in an insane world must sometimes appear mad. This is the real danger. When society manufactures the definition of sanity, it also manufactures your reflection. And if you don't match the image, you begin to doubt your own mind. But maybe, just maybe, the doubt is a form of intelligence. Maybe the fracture is a portal, because once you begin to question what's considered normal, you see that sanity is not a universal truth. It's a cultural construction. And culture has other illusions it needs you to believe. If it can define your sanity, what else can it define? What else does it shape, suppress, distort? If culture manufactures consent, what else does it manufacture? There's a moment in life, quiet, creeping, when the question arises, how much of me is actually me? Not the body, not the name, but the self behind the smile. The voice inside the thoughts. Who is that? We like to believe we are original, that our desires are our own, that the goals we chase were born from some authentic place within. But what if they weren't? What if you were scripted? René Girard called it mimetic desire, the idea that we want not because we truly need, but because we imitate. We model ourselves after others. We desire what they desire. We measure ourselves not against truth, but against reflection. From childhood, we are handed mirrors. Be like your father. Impress your teacher. Act like your friends. Want what successful people want. Chase what beautiful people chase. Each mirror tells us what to want. Each glance teaches us who to be. And over time, we begin to confuse imitation with identity. We build ourselves from borrowed pieces. A hairstyle we saw online. A job title we're told is impressive. A partner who looks good in photos. A life that photographs well, even if it feels hollow when the lights go out. We become marionettes in a hall of mirrors, performing roles that others wrote, pulling our own strings without realizing someone else tied them. It's not always sinister. Sometimes it comes from love. From parents who want the best for us, from friends trying to protect us, from a society that promises safety if we just play along. But over time, it becomes a kind of spiritual claustrophobia. A tightening around the chest. An unease that whispers, none of this is truly you. The tragedy is not that we imitate. Imitation is human. The tragedy is that we forget we're doing it. We call it passion. We call it success. We call it love. But beneath those names may lie something far more mechanical, a desire programmed, not chosen. Social media accelerates this process with terrifying precision. We see curated lives. We internalize their signals. We compare. We mimic. We perform. Not because we're shallow, but because we're wired to belong. And so we pursue desires that aren't really ours. We climb ladders that lead nowhere. We mold ourselves into shapes that win applause, while the real self grows quieter, fainter, almost forgotten. Until, one day, the applause stops feeling like validation and starts sounding like noise. That's when the mask begins to slip. And what you see underneath can be terrifying. Because when you peel away the imitation, there might not be a clear identity waiting. Just silence, just questions, just fragments. But maybe that's not emptiness. Maybe it's the raw material of truth, the space before the performance, before the script, before the mirrors. To question the self is to risk collapse. But it is also the first honest act. Because if the self was constructed, it can also be reimagined, not as a brand, not as a curated personality, but as something deeper, stranger, freer. This is where the anger fades, and something else takes its place, a quiet, eerie recognition that most of who we were was never truly us. And that maybe, just maybe, that's good news, because if the old self was an invention, we're finally free to stop performing. But this raises the most unsettling question of all. If the self was a mask, then what's behind it? Can we survive without the illusion, or is that where we finally begin to live? At first, it feels like death. Not the physical kind, but a deeper, quieter erasure, the collapse of everything you thought was you, the ambitions that drove you, the beliefs that comforted you, the identity you performed and protected. All of it begins to disintegrate. It starts when the roles no longer feel right, when the values you inherited ring hollow, and when the image you once fought to maintain starts to feel like a costume that no longer fits. Asterisk, this isn't madness. It's not dysfunctional. It's something far more sacred and far more dangerous. It's ego death. A psychological free fall where all borrowed truths dissolve, where meaning itself unravels, and the illusion of control is exposed for what it always was, a mask we cling to because the alternative, true freedom, feels unbearable. Existential. Philosophers like Heidegger, Camus, and Nietzsche all wrote from within this collapse. They described the moment when all external authorities, religion, morality, tradition lose their grip. What's left is the void, the terrifying realization that no grand narrative is coming to rescue us. Camus called this absurd, the tension between our craving for meaning and the silent indifference of the universe. And in that silence, we don't find answers. We find ourselves raw, unprotected, awake. This is the moment society teaches us to fear. It's the moment we spend our whole lives trying to avoid through distraction, entertainment, ideology, consumption. Anything to keep from confronting the silence underneath it all. But what if the silence isn't empty? What if it's real? Nietzsche called it the death of God, not just the collapse of religious faith, but the death of inherited values, the unraveling of every certainty we've used to hold ourselves together. And yet, he didn't despair. He saw it as the first step toward the Bermensch, the self-created individual who no longer imitates values, but births them from within. Because when nothing outside you can save you, you stop waiting to be saved. You stop performing. You stop pretending. And in the wreckage of that collapse, something new begins to emerge. Not comfort. Not clarity in the way we once knew it, but possibility. The terrifying, exhilarating possibility that you must now decide. What matters, not because it's expected, but because it's true to you. In the myth of Sisyphus, Camus tells the story of a man condemned to roll a boulder uphill for eternity. A meaningless task, a cruel fate. But Camus doesn't leave us in despair. He ends in defiance. He imagines Sisyphus smiling, because in the face of meaninglessness, he chooses rebellion. Not escape. Not resignation. Rebellion. And in that act of defiance, meaning is reborn, not discovered, but created. This is what the collapse of control makes possible. Not safety, but sovereignty. Not certainty, but agency. When all borrowed meanings fall away, when the masks have burned, when the structures have crumbled, what's left is space. The space to finally see, to finally choose, to finally become. The fire that once terrified you becomes the light you needed. The death you feared becomes the beginning. This is why so few awaken, not because they can't, but because the price is high. To see clearly, you must walk through the flames, alone and calmly. Because when you realize that control was always an illusion, you stop needing it. And in surrendering the illusion, you gain something far more powerful. Clarity. But clarity isn't safe. It's not comfortable. It's not certain. It's the end of illusion. The moment when you stop asking what's real and start becoming it. What if what we called love was actually a leash? It's a haunting question, the kind that lingers in silence and won't let go. Because if the answer is yes, then everything we built our lives around suddenly shifts. And we begin to see that what we thought was affection might have been architecture. That what we mistook for love might have been controlled. From the time we're children, we're taught that love is earned, that affection must be deserved. Approval becomes the currency of our survival, and punishment, its shadow. When we behave, we're good. When we conform, we're praised. But step outside the lines, question the rules, break the spell, and suddenly the love withers. It wasn't unconditional. It was contingent. In toxic family systems, this dynamic is the norm. Obedience is rewarded. Authenticity is punished. The child who cries too loudly, feels too deeply, speaks too freely, learns to shrink themselves to preserve the illusion of care. They learn that to be loved is to disappear, that to be safe is to lie. And those lies become habits. They become personalities. They become the self. But it doesn't stop at family. Cult psychology reveals the same mechanisms at scale. The leader becomes the source of love, the arbiter of worth. Disagreement is betrayal. Doubt is sin. We do this because we care about you, they say. But what they mean is, we will only care about you if you do this. And in that conditionality, the true weapon is revealed. Even outside of cults, systems everywhere deploy this same manipulation. Corporations pretend to care. Political movements perform empathy. Brands position themselves as belonging, healing, identity. Buy this. Believe this. Join this, and you'll be enough. Social media is soaked in it. Dopamine disguised as validation. Likes, shares, follows, the illusion of connection. But beneath the surface lies a behavioral training program conditioning our self-worth on algorithms. Each ping of digital affection tightens the leash. And we smile through it because it feels so much like love. But love doesn't manipulate. Love doesn't withhold when you disobey. It doesn't extract conformity. It doesn't perform. What we've been handed is a counterfeit, a mask that mimics love's warmth while disguising chains. Psychoanalyst Erich Fromm warned of this in The Art of Loving, how society had reduced love to possession, performance, and approval. Not a courageous meeting of souls, but a transaction. A contract with invisible terms. Don't be too much. Don't change too fast. Don't outgrow your role. And when we internalize these conditions, we begin to confuse submission with intimacy. We mistake silence for peace. We begin to feel guilty when we prioritize ourselves. We call it selfish. But that guilt is not a signal of wrongdoing. It's a scar from conditioning. Mythology understood this long before psychology gave it words. The sirens sang not because they loved, but because they lured. Their beauty was bait. Their affection was a trap. Their love, fatal. And yet, we're told to follow the song. To be agreeable, to be good, to be lovable, which so often means to be obedient. But what if the affection we craved was never real? What if it was a mechanism, a system built on the exploitation of our deepest need, to be seen, accepted, and held? The realization hurts, it cuts deep. It feels like betrayal, because it is, not of us but by the systems we trusted. The institutions, the ideologies, the relationships, even the inner voice that we thought was our own, but turned out to be a chorus of conditioned demands. Once the illusion collapses, the world goes quiet. No more applause. No more external approval. Just stillness. But in that silence, something new can begin. Something fragile. Something real. Because when the false love falls away, the space opens for the real thing. And real love doesn't scream. It isn't in demand. It doesn't trade. So here we are. After the mirrors have cracked, the masks have burned, and the illusions have collapsed. What remains? At first, not much. Just fragments. A hollow where certainty used to live. But look closer and something begins to stir. It's quiet. Almost unrecognizable. Because we've never truly seen it before. Not through the eyes of performance. Not through the filters of borrowed identity. But through something older. Something real. Ours. What we thought was breaking down was all along breaking through. Suffering, the disorientation, the collapse, maybe they weren't signs of failure. Maybe they were the labor pains of a birth we didn't know we were meant to experience. A birth not into something new, but into something ancient. Ourselves. Carl Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming whole. Not perfect, not polished, but honestly, raw, integrated. It's not a return to the child we once were or a rise to the adult we're told to become. It's a spiral into the depths of the psyche, through the shadows, the lies, the stories, and out. The other side. This journey doesn't promise clarity in the traditional sense. It doesn't offer comfort or certainty or applause. It offers truth, and truth doesn't soothe. It confronts. It strips away everything artificial until only the essential remains. And in that space, something astonishing happens. We stop running. We stop chasing the false gods of approval. We stop bending ourselves into acceptable shapes. We stop trading authenticity for love and silence for peace. We stop needing to be seen because now, finally, we are the ones doing the seeing. And what we see is not a world we must conquer or escape. What we see is a mirror that doesn't distort, doesn't flatter. Don't lie. It simply reflects the real, the fractured, the whole. And when we look into it, perhaps for the first time, we don't flinch because the self-staring back isn't broken. It's free. Free from the narratives we inherited. Free from the masks we wore. Free from the systems that told us who we needed to be. In that moment, clarity doesn't feel like triumph. It feels quiet. Not the silence of emptiness, but the stillness of alignment. The inner world is no longer at war with the outer mask. The truth is no longer buried beneath performance. This is not the kind of transformation that society celebrates. There are no certificates for it, no status, no reward. It's invisible, unmeasurable, but unmistakably real. Because once you've seen clearly, once you've stepped through the mirror, you can't go back. You can play the game. But you know it's a game. You can wear a mask. But you know it's a costume. You can sit in the system. But you know it's a construct. And that knowing, that quiet, dangerous knowing, changes everything. This isn't peace in the way we're sold it. It's not serenity in the face of chaos. It's something stranger. Something more powerful. It's the power of not needing to belong. The strength of being unknown, even to yourself. The liberation of no longer performing. You were never broken. You were breaking out. And now, as the fog lifts and the mirror appears, you don't look away. You step in, not because you're certain, not because you're ready, but because, for the first time, you see clearly.